Con ustedes, Candid Wüest, VP Cyber Protection Research de Acronis.
Hola, bienvenido. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining my presentation. My name is Candid Wüest. I'm a Vice President of Cyber Protection Research with Acronis, and it's my pleasure to talk about the threats out there in the internet. And unfortunately, yes, some of those, if you do make those mistakes, they can literally cost your organization millions of dollars. And of course, nobody really wants to do that, right? So let's see how you can actually prevent your organization or yourself from paying a lot of money for mistakes that could have been avoided. But we all know we live in very strange times at the moment, right? And the question I want to start with is, just think about it. Which C-level person was actually responsible inside your organization for leading the digital transformation at the moment? Was it the CTO? Was it the CEO, the CISO? Or probably, as with most companies at the moment, it was COVID-19, right? I mean, yes, I know it's a little joke, but we have seen that a lot of companies, they literally kind of had to change overnight due to the pandemic, due to the lockdown. And now suddenly they work from home. They have a lot more online or cloud business, and it's actually working. But the question is it also working securely? As of course, the bad guys, the cyber criminals, they already knew about it, right? They always hop on to new big news events. So they made their profits from using the COVID-19 fear as well. And we saw it right from the beginning. Already in February, we saw the first attacks happening because the attackers started misusing the, let's say, the request for information around the whole COVID scenario. They were sending out emails, phishing emails. They were attacking companies because they were now in different configuration modes. And of course, they made a lot of money, as you can see. So some of them do make millions, not all of the cyber criminals, but some do. And that, of course, means it will continue because they want to make the profit, right? Everyone wants to have a piece of the cake. So we've seen lots of attacks, but the good news is it's actually not really new methods. It's not that they invented something completely new to attack you. It's just that it's in a new look. So they disguise it a little bit different. For example, we've seen a lot of emails, scam emails coming around, which are at the moment trying to give you money. Of course, there is no money, but they pretend, hey, if you want to get some relief money, just fill out the Word document attached, send me all your private information, and then we will send you hundreds of thousands of dollars. But of course, they only want to get your information, right? And we have seen attackers using exactly this, collecting information, and then using this personal information to apply for relief money on their own. But of course, they're not going to use your bank account. They're going to use their own, so the money will be in their hands. And if you decide that you want relief money as well, you won't be able because someone else already did it in your name. We've seen, of course, ransomware attacks. So those which encrypt your data and then hold it ransom, so you have to pay to get the data back. And a lot of those attacks were going after hospitals as well, or medical institutions. And you can imagine at the moment, a hospital, they don't really have time to go and kind of try to do disaster recovery. They have to be up and running, right? So usually they don't really have much wiggle room to say, oh, maybe we're down for 48 hours, but then we're up again. They have to treat patients, not just during the pandemic. I mean, that has been a fact before as well. But now it's even more crucial that they do not have any downtime. And the attackers, they're just misusing this fact. We've seen a lot more fake shops or kind of infected online shops. So here the idea of the attacker is, of course, they try to sell you face masks or sanitizing utilities. And whenever you pay for it, you will never receive any of the goods. So they take your credit card information, they take your bank transfer money, but you will never receive anything. They might try to delay it with some, oh, we're having issues with the parcel delivery, it will arrive next month, but you will never receive anything. And this is not just for small companies. We've seen even governments paying 35 million US dollars and never receiving anything because they were falling for fake online shops. Of course, for a consumer at home, it's probably more on the, if you want to buy maybe food, right? Online delivery. You haven't done it, but now you have to because it's a lockdown. So a lot of people are going to new shops where they don't really know if it's a legitimate shop and they fall for this information. We've seen more and more attacks against online video conferencing solutions like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and so on, or WebEx. And usually it's not that there is a vulnerability, although Zoom has definitely a few ones. We've seen Teams being patched as well recently, but very often it's just a weak password. So the attackers are guessing the password, or there is no password at all. So everyone can log in and they could just play a harmless prank, as in loud music in the background, but very often they will try to infect you or kick you out of your own meeting and disrupting your business process. And of course, we also seen infected applications, being it websites or smart mobile phone applications, claiming to be some tracing applications or something else, but in fact, they will just steal all your data on the phone or try to steal passwords and other information from it. So scams that we have already noticed for tens of years, but now with the theme of COVID and coronavirus. So what is kind of one of the most common threats that we see? Well, it's still the email, which is the attack vector number one. So a lot of things go in through email because it's very convenient, very cheap for the attackers to use. Most commonly, it's the office document that you receive in your email, and it might have some document attached with a macro. So if you open it, you actually have to enable, you click the button of enable content, and only then will the malicious macro run and download further payload in the background. So if you delete it before opening, nothing will happen. But most people are curious, and of course those emails are getting better and better. Some of the attackers, like the Emotet group, they will actually reply to real emails that they found in other people's inbox. So you might receive an email from someone that you do know, replying to an email that you actually wrote themselves, and that is quite convincing. And it might have an attachment, or it might have a link to an online site, usually something like a cloud storage from Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS. And then it's a lot of trust behind it. You know the domain. You know that Microsoft Azure is a trusted domain, but the file that you're downloading is actually a Trojan horse trying to take over your PC. We also seen, of course, a lot of phishing attacks. So you receive an email, at the moment very commonly something like an invite to a meeting. Your employee might not really be kind of used to it, so they don't really know where to click. They end up at the site that looks like an Office 365 or a Zoom login page. They put in their credentials, but of course those credentials will end up at the attacker site and they can then misuse it. And not just for the video conferencing, but maybe the employees are using the same password for your VPN as well, or for the email and for other accounts. So they will try it with other accounts as well, the so-called password stuffing, and then maybe they get successful. Maybe they can misuse other accounts as well. And last but not least, the business email compromise or CEO fraud. Very popular at the moment as well. The original idea for the attacker is that they send an email trying to spoof the address of the CEO or CFO of a company, sending it to someone in the accounts payable and say, hey, we definitely need to process this invoice. Can you please submit 50,000 right away? It has to be done today. And if you don't pay attention, you might think, oh yes, this is my boss. I have to do because he tells me to. And you might send the money, but it's actually the attacker. And of course, the bank account belongs to the attacker as well. And we've seen more than 2 billion US dollars being lost to those attacks in the US alone per year. So of course, there's a lot of money to be made for the attackers, and they try variations of it as well. So we've seen that they go after any account that they can compromise, and then look into the inbox and see, does your email actually send some invoices. Maybe you send invoices to your customers. So then they will go through it, take the one from last month, maybe from July, change the IBAN or a bank account number in the PDF, make a new one for the next month for September, and then send it to your customers. So your customers will receive an invoice from your account because it was hacked, which looks quite convincing, but it's a different bank account. Most companies won't notice this and probably will pay for it, and the money will be gone. So a lot of attacks happening through emails. But of course, now with the working from home, a lot of the companies have started to kind of allow people to connect to the office. Very often it could be remote desktop protocol, RDP, built into Windows. And we see hundreds of thousands of exposed RDP servers on the internet exposed to everyone. So you can scan for them and you can find them. I listed here a few pictures, which you can see are, well, quite interesting to look at. I mean, yes, they could of course be honeypot systems, which are deliberately there to catch attackers, or maybe some of them are actually protected with sophisticated passwords and two-factor authentication, but I have my doubts. So I think some of them might have weak passwords, so the attacker could just guess, maybe it is 12345, maybe it is Mexico 2020, and with that, they could already be in that machine, and from there, it's one step away from the whole organization. If the password is strong enough, well, then there's always the chance that some of the software installed has some vulnerabilities. And we have seen this year many vulnerabilities in VPN services like Pulse VPN, in the DNS from Microsoft, in Citrix, in F5, and so on. So a lot of those companies use software which might not be updated, allowing the attacker to execute code on that machine. And again, from there, they can hop into the whole intranet, infecting even more machines. And of course, with the move to the cloud, we also saw more and more cloud services being used, which is fantastic because it is, of course, agile, it's dynamic, you can adapt it. A lot of the services are already built, and sometimes it's even cheaper. But we also saw that a lot of the companies don't have the knowledge. So if they use, for example, the Amazon AWS S3 buckets, like storage, cloud storage, they might not configure it properly. So we see every week some cloud buckets which are misconfigured, and in some cases they will reveal all the information to everyone on the internet if they know the name. This happened, for example, with the French newspaper Le Figaro, which at the beginning of this year had 8 terabytes of data exposed to everyone on the internet. And unfortunately, it also included customer login data with the password in clear text. So definitely information that should not be readable by everyone. So make sure that you do check the configuration. And last but not least, of course, ransomware. As I mentioned, the encrypting malware has an all-time high at the moment because it is very profitable. Some groups like NetWalker made about 25 million US dollars since March of this year. So they made definitely a lot of profit during the whole pandemic. And there's nearly no week going without any news about Honda, Garmin, Xerox, or any of those big companies getting compromised with ransomware. But of course, it's not just the big companies. We see it with smaller ones as well. And we also see it with consulting and service provider companies like Cognizant. They have been compromised, allowing the attacker to use them as a supply chain or as a stepping stone to jump from one machine to all their customers and clients. So that means you might have a very good security posture, all your exposed services are very well protected, all your email have two-factor authentication and good phishing protection, but if your service provider is not well protected, well, they might be misused and then they might have access to your network and can actually roll out malware from there. And this is exactly what we've seen happening more and more this year. And of course, this is very common at the moment. We've seen an increase in ransomware attacks in Mexico as well, because it is just very profitable. So if you look at the ransomware attacks, it's usually not fully automated. It's kind of a semi-manual attack pattern. So the attacker, they scan the internet, finding weak RDP servers, sending emails and wait for someone to actually open it. And once they have it, they will try to find more information about the organization, try to jump from one machine to another, and then kind of leverage that foothold in the end to then roll out the ransomware. And the rollout is very often just at the end of the attack. So once they have access to all your machines, that means probably domain administrator, so they have the highest credential, and then they can use, for example, group policy objects to roll out the ransomware or logon scripts. Or we've even seen that the attackers are misusing the software distribution that you have in place, again, maybe from a software or service provider, to roll out the ransomware inside your organization. And one thing to note is you should definitely consider every ransomware attack at the moment a data breach, because it's very popular for the attackers to not just encrypt your data, but also steal a lot of information, as in terabytes of sensitive information, financial records, customer records, and keep them in the internet. And of course, they will threaten to release it should you not pay the ransom. So that means, yes, backup is not the end of everything. Of course, you should have a backup and disaster recovery so that you can replay it if your data has been encrypted. But this will not protect you against a data breach, right? Your organization might already be up and running again, but if your information actually gets leaked, then you might face some privacy fines. If you're doing business with Europe, you might be facing GDPR fines and so on. So backup alone will not protect you here. And if we look at the numbers, so I plotted here the numbers of the daily ransomware attacks that have been blocked in North and South America. And we see it's actually quite constant, with two big spikes, one at the end of February and one at the end of May. So those were kind of higher attacks that we've seen. For example, one in Chile. And actually for July, I see that 40% of all the ransomware attacks that have been blocked in America has been in Chile. So quite interesting there. But of course, yes, Mexico with 10% is high up in the top 4 as well. And we see that it's kind of changing every month because the attackers are moving from country to country, giving you some time to breathe again. And after 2 months, when you probably have forgotten about the whole ransomware thing, they will hit you again and making it quite expensive if you're not prepared for it. So as I said, they usually steal your information. Some of the gangs, like Sodonokobi, they will try and auction the information off to the highest bidder. Some others, they just kind of publish it for free. The Maze ransomware group, they will advertise it as well and kind of keep releasing it in multiple parts. And the same happens for the Networker group. So all of those have underground websites where they publish the information. So it could be that your competition will find out all about your secrets or the next marketing plans or financial records. Or maybe another attacker will find out some information about how to attack your organization with that information. So how are they doing it? Well, first, they need access to your organization. We already talked about emails, right? We talked about infected websites or vulnerable services like the RDP or VPN, but there's even more. Sometimes we see that they are buying access to the organization. So on underground forums, some attackers are selling their access. So maybe they compromised one of your users. They used it for spamming, sending out some emails, but then they want to make more profit. So they resell the access to that machine in your organization to the highest bidder. That can be $50. And then someone else can actually use it to download ransomware and start from there. And as I mentioned, we also see supply chain attacks. So either through software like service providers or through actual software that you are using. So maybe some of the software packages that you use gets compromised. And then with the next update, they will download a backdoor which gives access to your organization. So once it's inside the organization, they will use the discovery phase. So they want to check what's actually interesting in your organization. They can do it with living off the land. This includes, for example, fileless attacks. So they don't write anything to your disk, to the hard drive. They keep everything in memory. So this could be a payload, a DLL, or something which runs in memory. So if you reboot the machine, it will actually be gone, no traces, making it a lot harder for forensics to find out. And of course, for traditional antivirus to filter it as well. Or they are using dual use tools. So they are using your infrastructure against you. This could be with PowerShell. PowerShell is installed by Microsoft on all modern Windows operating systems, can be used for a lot of good things, but unfortunately we also see that it is used by the attackers. We see that about 500,000 PowerShell scripts are actually blocked every month on the endpoint because they are used to download further payload or exfiltrate passwords and so on. But we also see the WMI, the Windows Management Instrumentation, which is built in, allowing you to query some information about the system or doing some task like installing a software on a different machine if you have the password. And of course, the attackers, they use whatever they can get their hands on. So there are publicly available tools like Cobalt Strike or Powersploit or Metasploit, which are usually used by penetration tester to check the security of your organization. But of course, an attacker, well, they're doing exactly the same, right? We've seen some which say, well, a ransomware attack is just a very expensive penetration test, and probably a surprise one for you as well. But they will actually teach you afterwards how they got in. It's just that you have to pay a lot of money for it. And once they're kind of satisfied that they know where they are, they will, of course, try to escalate their privileges. So trying to get the domain administrator account or system account locally, because with that, they can then move from one machine to another machine. And typically, that's done by Mimikatz. It's also one of those tools which can be used to dump passwords from a Windows memory. But we also saw brute forcing attacks where they just guess the passwords, or as I said before, maybe through a phishing website, they got the password of the admin, and maybe they have the same for the email. Maybe they can actually use the email to reset the password, and then they get the password in the email, which they control. So once they have that, they will usually try to delete all your backups, because of course they don't want you to have a backup. So once they are admin, well, they have a lot of power. So very often if the backup is on the same machine, they will just delete the backup. We also saw that if they have access, for example, to those web consoles, because they reset the password, they will try to deinstall the antivirus solution. They will try to shut down or terminate the processes of the anti-malware functionality. Again, just to make it very easy for them, because afterwards, nothing will stop them from rolling out the ransomware. And last but not least, once they're satisfied, they will use those passwords, those privileges, to jump from one machine to another. That can again be done through PSExec, a sysinternal tool from Microsoft, also a legitimate tool, or WMI and so on. So now they're on a lot of the different machines, which means they can start with their impact. They will start encrypting all the files, or at least the information or sensitive information that they think you want to get back. And as I mentioned, they will also steal some information before they encrypt it, because that makes their leverage a lot bigger. So they can try to actually negotiate with yourself what you want to pay to not have those information leaked in the internet. And last but not least, they will clean up the machines. So they will try to delete the email. They will try to delete the browser history. They delete their own malware so that you cannot easily figure out how they got in, because maybe they can reuse it in a month, specifically if you pay, and then you get hit again by another group and probably have to pay again. So to summarize it, we see that the attackers usually start with an email. That's about 80 to 90% of all the attacks start with an email, with an attachment or a link. If it's an attachment, it's usually a Word document with a macro. So it has to be user enabled, but of course it could also be in a zip file with a password. So sometimes they try to bypass the sandbox and automated analysis. Once the macro runs, it usually will start a PowerShell script in the background. This PowerShell can download some payload directly into memory, so fileless. Could be, as I said, some payload like Mimikatz to steal your password tokens. This will then be used to gain higher privileges, And with that, they will jump from one machine to another, for example, with PSExec, and then they will exfiltrate the data and start the ransomware process. And of course, the earlier in this kill chain you can block the attack, the better it is. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 weeks for the attackers to actually finish from start to end. That's a lot of time for you to actually notice that something is happening, if you have log files and if you do check the log files. So what can you do to protect yourself, or what should you do to protect and not end up paying 10 million US dollars to get your information back? Well, emails. You need to have a solution to monitor the emails, scan the emails for malicious attachments or URLs. And of course, you should also do some awareness training, like do some awareness training exercise with your employees to make sure that they know how those scam emails look and also where to report it. Because if someone will detect it, well, maybe the other guy next to him would not know about it, but if he reports it, you can block it at the company level and protect everyone from it. But make no mistake about it, awareness trainings will never block 100% of the threats. We all know there's always one who clicks on every email. So just to keep in mind, it has to be a balance with technology as well. Second one is cloud or any new services, exposed services. Make sure that you check the configuration, how it is set up, maybe the access. Do you have two-factor authentication enabled, single sign-on enabled? All those things need to be considered and audited. And for passwords, of course, you need to have strong, secure authentication. Best is to use an identity and access management, an IAM solution that can help you with that, can integrate into a single sign-on and so on, and make sure that you are using multiple factor authentication, like those tokens you can receive on your mobile phone. These are definitely increasing the overall security. They can sometimes also be bypassed, but they are making it a lot harder for the attackers. Of course, data, wherever it is stored or in transit, should be protected. So make sure that you have backups, that you do protect your backups from any attacks. And of course, you should also make sure that you can access those backups when needed. So availability, making sure that the services are running and that the system itself is not attacked by malware. So it has to be a combination of those. And last but not least, the fifth point is visibility. With all the increase of moving to the cloud or encryption in the network, we are losing a lot of visibility, what's happening with our machines, right? The perimeter at the corporate firewall has long been gone. Now your identity is the new perimeter, and you need to monitor what's happening with those identities. So make sure you have the log files, from the cloud as well, and that you are monitoring them, either with a SIM or with some automated solution, depending on the size of your organization. So how can you keep up with the flood and the frequency of all those attacks? Well, you should consolidate your solutions that you use. Make sure that you have an integrated and also an interdisciplinary process, right? Not just an isolated backup, an isolated vulnerability assessment, and maybe antivirus. Those solutions need to talk to each other. If one of them finds something, it needs to be able to block it at the firewall level. It needs to be able to check the backup for some attacks as well. So it has to be integrated. It has to be efficient as well. And of course, simple, because it's getting more and more complicated and we get less and less time to react to those attacks. So the administrator has to know what they're doing and it has to be efficient and simple for them. And in order to help with that, you can of course also look into automation, right? Maybe the password reset for your employees should not be something which costs you 30 minutes each time, but maybe you can automate it with machine learning or artificial intelligence to close out those tickets automatically. And if you follow those 5 simple steps, you're already well protected and one step ahead of probably all your competitions, which might end up paying those millions. So with that, I can say, please protect yourself, stay cyber fit, and gracias.
Agradecemos a Candid Wüest por su participación en el IT Solutions Day.